Everyone sit down. We're going to start with the last talk of the day. Please welcome Steven and Siegfried. They are going to talk about the little brother that is watching all of us. Welcome.
Thank you. Slides. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Siegfried, and this is Steven, and we are both from Germany, from a research institute called Fraunhofer. And today we present our work on mobile tracking applications. This work was conducted with our offensive security team called Team SIG. Team SIG is basically a group of students and researchers meeting up in their spare time and looking into interesting security stuff. So I also would like to mention a few members who were participating in that research: is Stefan Huber, Alexander, Benedict, Daniel, Julian, Julius, Kevin, Michael, Philip, and Sebald. Okay, yeah, I'm Siegfried, as already mentioned. I'm leading a research group at this institute called Secure Software Engineering. Our main research focuses on static and dynamic code analysis, so building new tools in order to automatically find vulnerabilities in binaries. I'm a founder of this offensive security team and also a founder of a tool called Code Inspect, which is an Android reverse engineering tool. Steven, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Sure, thanks. I'm the deputy head of the Secure Software Engineering Group. I'm also a computer scientist, and my main research focus is on static code analysis, especially data flow analysis, and I consider myself an ethical hacker.
Good, thank you. Good, a short agenda for today. So I will start with a short motivation, give a little bit of background information about the topic. Then we will dig into our findings. We have three categories. First, client-side authorization, then some findings on client-side vulnerabilities, and some findings on server-side vulnerabilities. During our research, we also found two malware families on Google Play Store, which we will talk about, a little bit about a responsible disclosure, and a summary in the end. Good, motivation. So, well, surveillance, or basically when you talk about tracking applications, there's also the word surveillance in my mind. Surveillance exists for decades, right? There has been different gadgets out there that can track people. But actually, the most surveillance gadget or device is basically in our pocket, the smartphone, because it has a lot of sensors, getting access to location information, getting access to contacts, and so on and so forth. And this is also what spyware and red makes use of, and I guess you guys are all aware of this. But we ask ourselves the question also, all the benign reason for tracking applications. And well, we did a little bit of research and we find three kind of areas. On the one hand side, families. We found a lot of applications out there that whatever father wants to know where the kid is, if it's safe or not, like legitimate reasons. Couples, we found a lot of track my boyfriend, track my girlfriend applications. Probably they don't trust on each other, or they think the one is cheating on him or her, whatever. And so these apps exist, and also friends, because friends, I want to know where my buddy is, and so on. So there are all legitimate reasons for those kind of tracking applications. The question is now, how do you differentiate between both? Because from a technical perspective, they are the same, right? So if you implement it. So we looked a little bit up, and we found in the Google Android Security Report from 2017 a quote which describes commercial spyware, which is considered the malicious part. It says, any application that transmits sensitive information off the device without user consent and does not display a persistent notification, then this is happening. So this means, whatever, if I would like to implement a benign tracking application, I need to show, for instance, notification showing, hey, right now I'm accessing your location information and I'm sending it to your father or whatever, then it should be fine and it should be able to put these kind of apps into the Play Store. Otherwise, it's considered malware. So in our research focused only on those legitimate tracking applications. Well, we asked the research question, how well is the collected data protected? Because there are a lot of sensitive data out there. How well do these kind of apps protect my data? For that, well, we looked up on Google Play Store, we typed in whatever, track my girlfriend, track my boyfriend, and we downloaded the first hits. In total, 19 different applications. Why 19? There is no special reason. We just collected a couple of applications. At some point we stopped and then we said, hey, let's look into those applications. The focus here was not on the commercial tracking application. Those are all freely available applications and you can use this because there has been a lot of research in the commercial tracking application world in the past. As a spoiler, of all of those 19 applications, we found 37 different vulnerabilities and also very high severe vulnerabilities. And in the remaining talk, we will explain a few of them. Good. A few words about background information. Very, very simple setup, just that we're on the same page. So how does this work? If you have a tracking application, basically you as an observer, for instance, the father installs the application and also the monitor person like the kid installs the same application. And then in the beginning, there is some form of pairing process going on that both are connected. And then, well, obviously, the monitor person collects all the sensitive data, whatever incoming text message and so on, and it sends it to the cloud storage or tracking provider, and the observer pulls it. Very simple. Interestingly, on the tracking provider, there are very sensitive information like location information, call history, incoming text messages, incoming WhatsApp messages, and so on and so forth. And a few applications of those tracking applications also added cool functionality like adding a messenger inside the application. So this means that the observer can chat with the observed person or also can share pictures or images, which is important for one part of the talk. Good. Let's start with the first kind of findings. We call it client-side authorization. For that, we picked the example of premium features. Well, in Android, well, if you develop the application, for instance, if you would like, in that particular case of the application, if you would like to remove the advertisement, you need to pay €1.50, for instance, very well known. And we were curious, as what we usually do, how was it implemented in that case? So, and then we looked into the code and we found the following snippet. Share preferences, get Boolean with the key ls and the value. If the value is true, then basically on the client side, it disables the advertisement. For those of you who are not so familiar with Android, the share preferences is basically a key value-based storage in form of an XML file. And this XML file is then created and is part of the application and also at the file system level. So in this case, it's set to false. And if you, for instance, pay this €1.50, this file is set to true. And then the first line, it reads the value. And if it's true, then question is, can you manipulate this file? Answer is yes. There are two ways. Obviously, if you're on a rooted device, you can manipulate the file. If you're on an unrooted device, in that case, if the application allows the backup feature, then you can back up the application, including this XML file. Then you modify the XML file, set the value to true, and then you restore it. And here we go. This is nothing new. This is well known. So we learned, yes, we can change it, and we can get rid of the advertisement without paying. When we look further into those entries, we found another interesting one called SMS full. What does this mean? This means if you have the observer would like to get all the text messages of your monitored person, for instance, and if you do not pay, you only see the first X characters of the text message. If you pay, you see the complete text message. This is their kind of business model, whatever. Well, we already learned, yes, we can manipulate this file, and yes, we can see the complete text message. Nevertheless, we were interested in how did they implement this. And this was quite interesting. So this protocol basically was the observer says, hey, I would like to get the SMS message or the text message from the monitored person. And the server says, yeah, sure, here are all the text messages, like the complete text messages. Text message 1, text message 2, text message 3 of the person I would like to know from the text messages. So they are already at the client side. So if they're already at the client side in full length, so how did they enforce then this check? Yes, the answer is it was in the code. So if you did not pay, it just shows the 50 characters of the text message. And if you paid this €4 or whatever, it shows the complete text message to the observer. And this is kind of, yeah, you shouldn't do this. As a short summary for this part, since we always see this with the shared preferences, do not use the shared preference for payment or license checks. There are proper APIs for this, and use them instead. Okay, so this was it for my part. I will now hand over to Stephen, who will continue with the remaining part.
Thanks, Siegfried. So I will now go over client-side and communication vulnerabilities. So before you can use those apps, you have to log in, which means you have to enter your username, which is your email address, and your password, and you click on OK, and this whole thing gets sent to the server. So what we did is we just put in our test account, clicked on enter, and we saw that they transferred to the server. It was unprotected HTTP communication, so that was good for us as attackers because we can easily do a man-in-the-middle attack here. However, we don't see our username and our password, we just see some garbled stuff. First attempt to get some sense out of that, just do it multiple times. And what you can see is when we do the same login request 4 times, these are key value pairs, and there are always 2 values that are identical. Like the green ones are always identical and the blue ones are always identical. The keys are different, but the values are always the same. So the big question is, what is going on here? Since our username and our password never changes that we enter, this must have something to do with our username and our password. So we looked into the code. What these guys did is they had a hard-coded key inside the app. They used this hard-coded key, XORed it with the username that you entered, encoded the result with base 64, and this is the green value that you have seen in the network trace. Now what they do, since these are key value pairs, is they have a predefined list of potential keys for the key value pairs. They at random choose one entry of this list and take this as a key. For the passwords, the same thing happens. They XOR it with a key, encode it base 64, and for the key value pairs, they just choose randomly from a different distinct list of keys. So if you want to reverse that, you just have to look, okay, is this from the key list of username or key list of password, undo base 64, undo XOR, off you run with all the credentials. That is kind of bad. Now, if you remember that original network trace, there was also some other stuff like AAA equals whatnot and data. And this is just random garbage because they think their app is more secure if they put in some additional garbage in the network traffic. And nah, not really. They're not really the winners. So this totally doesn't help to secure anything. Now, if you have a security problem inside your app, that's not good. But if you have a security problem inside your backend, that's way worse, because this might allow people to actually go for the data that is not locally on your phone, but that is inside the backend, which is potentially all your data. And this is why we came up with the cool vulnerability awards here, going from bad to worse. Starting with place number 4. This is called Who Needs Authentication. So as we can see, this network request we captured here was HTTP again. We have seen this all over the place. This is nothing new. Then they transmit a user ID, which is my user ID as the person who requests data. Note that this is just a user ID. There is no password whatsoever. I just claim who I want to be, and that's all fine for that app. Next, I need to provide the ID of the person, of the tracked person for whom I want to get data. Again, I can just claim. I don't need to prove anything. And the date, for which date I want to get the location data of that person. In that case, it's also important to note that this user ID doesn't need to have anything to do with that child ID, which means that I don't even need to have access to the data of that specific person I want to track. I only need to know the ID of the person I want to track, ask nicely, and I get all the location records of that person on the date I requested. Of course, since these are longitude and latitudes, we just piped it into Google Maps. This is one of our test phones. One of our students ran around with a test phone in the city of Darmstadt, so you can actually get a live track of people moving around their daily business. In the same app, there was also a feature to extract the text messages that the observed person has received. Now the question is, how do we get the text messages of a person? It's easy, we just have to ask nicely. So we need the user ID of the person, and we need to say we want 100 text messages, and the server politely replies and says, okay, this message was sent on that date with that content and was sent by that phone number. Off you go with all the data. Now, what happens if I don't know the username of the person for whom I want to get the data? I just leave this field blank. I don't tell the server for whom I want to get data. And so the server says, yeah, sure, I just give it for all the users. Just pick what you need. This is like a database dump. Okay, this was 4th place. Moving on to something worse. This is 3rd place of the vulnerability awards. Some apps also allow you to exchange images. For these images, they put it on the cloud, they require user authentication, and they also filter the images that you can see based on your user ID. So to get more images, you need to somehow bypass that authentication. Interestingly, the backend they used in the app even has a web front end. Why you need a web front end for something that is an API, I don't know, don't ask me. You have a paging solution, so you see like 30 images per page and you can click through it. We just took page 7 for no reason at all. And you have to specify your username and you have to authenticate normally. However, what you can do is a simple SQL injection on that username. This is really IT security 101. And yep, you got the pictures. And since they have this nice web front end, you can even conveniently browse through it, so there's absolutely no need to create a download script or whatever. And since we're talking about tracker apps, for example, where boyfriends and girlfriends exchange images, they usually talk about things like dinner or, I don't think we have minors in the room, do we? Okay, other images. So this means we're talking about a severe data breach here, because people just put images on a backend service without any proper authentication or whatsoever. Vulnerability awards place 2. So what is better than getting images? Getting credentials. This app was created in a way that when I install it on a phone, it generates a unique hardware token for my phone. When I later uninstall the app and install it back again, it generates the same hardware token because it's the same device. And it remembers me. So the app says, hey, welcome back, Steven. Even though I have not logged in or anything, because it just recognizes this is the same hardware token. And they have implemented in a way that if I tell the server the correct hardware token, the server gives me my username in plain text and my password in plain text. So we have an oracle for usernames and passwords here. Which means, however, if we want to exploit this oracle, we need to give this hardware token. Don't be confused here, device ID is not an Android device ID like an IMI. This is a hardware token that they generate. Brute forcing this hardware token won't really work, it's a bit too long. It's a bit too complex to do guesswork. We tried an empty one, didn't really work. But there is our old trusty friend, the SQL injection. In that case, we had to be a bit more creative because the server backend can only deal with one record at a time. Doesn't matter, just set a limit. And do a simple curl command on bash. There's really not much magic to it. And what you get is plaintext usernames and plaintext passwords. And of course, since we don't want a single one, but we want more, we can just iterate over it by gradually increasing the offset. Now, since we're researchers, we're white hats, we don't want to just dump credential databases. Our goal is to find out how big the problem is. So what we did is we just wanted to know how many records there are. And the server stopped responding at about 1.7 million. Of course, if you're a bad guy, you could also try to take these passwords and log into the associated email accounts, for example, or see whether you can get into Facebook accounts or whatnot, because people are known to reuse passwords all over the place, right? So this is a leak that has consequences way beyond these tracker apps. Okay, now moving on to first place of the vulnerability awards, and this is really something I like would be the wrong word. Anyway, they earned their first place. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Google Firebase, for the sake of our talk, it's just another web-based database. It has some other features, but that's not important here. So this app, to give you some background, it first asks me for my username. Then I click on next, and it says, hi, Steven. And then I enter my password, which means that it knows that I'm Steven even before I've entered my password. So we ask ourselves what's going on here. When you enter your username and click on next, the app sends this request to the app's backend server. And the server replies with a user ID. So it gives us an association between user email and user ID. And this is the response. With that ID, it then connects to the Google Firebase and already gets access to the data. So there is no password involved yet. It just accesses the Firebase. This is public data. It just creates the correct URL and gets back my location data. And it also gets back my user record, including, of course, plaintext passwords. So what we have is the app takes my email address, translates it into a user ID, and uses that to download my password. Why on earth should you do that? The answer is in the app code. So what these guys did is the app obtains my correct password, lets me type in my password, and does a string comparison, and then tells me, yeah, this is correct or not. The password check is inside the app. The server doesn't even care. It's just the app that does a string comparison and then refuses to go on. Okay, so what happens, since this is public anyway, you just need to put in a valid ID and download the data. What happens if you put no ID? Oops. We're back with the database dump. And this is not only location data, this is also the user credentials. So in the end, all the plain text stuff. Yeah, shit happens. Okay, now very quickly concerning sideloading malware. While we were looking for our benign but vulnerable apps, we also encountered two pieces of malware. These are the two. What is interesting here is that these two are not the actual malware, they are downloaders for malware. Which means when you start this app will first perform an anti-dynamic analysis check. I'll show that in a second. It will then extract some device information, like your IMEI, your model brand, and so on. We'll send it to a server, and the server will decide whether malware should be installed or not. If the server says no, the app will just display a random error message. Bogus stuff. If the server says yes, the app will download an APK file and uses social engineering to coerce me into clicking on install when the operating system dialog comes up for that secondary APK. To not get caught, these downloaders were in the Google Play Store. They used string obfuscation. The first example, they just translated their strings to ASCII characters, represented them as hex numbers, and that was kind of their strings. And for anti-dynamic analysis, they used a captcha. The second piece of malware that was a bit more elaborated, they used AES with a hard-coded key and a hard-coded initialization vector. And this was not only used for obfuscating static strings like URLs, this was also used to obfuscate the network traffic with this command and control server. So my IMEI that was transferred or the name of the device brand, this was also encoded with this static AES key. For anti-dynamic analysis, it was just a button click. So there was nothing fancy here. Okay. And those were the vulnerabilities. Let me just quickly go over our responsible disclosure process. We informed the vendors. We gave them 90 days to fix the bugs, at least 90 days. This whole thing took quite a while. Reactions were interesting. Some people said, okay, we'll fix it, which is good. Some people didn't bother to reply. I mean, why should you care about having all your data in public? There was even one guy who thought we were blackmailing him, and he said, how much money do you want? So the problem is when you're employed at a federal research institution in Germany, you're not allowed to blackmail people, so you can't earn money from that. And there was even one dude who said it's not a bug, it's a feature. Yeah, okay. We also had a nice chat with the US Federal Trade Commission that were very interested in our findings, and with the Google App Security Initiative. I think some people from Google are even here in the room. And some apps were removed from the Play Store. This is all nice. However, if you remove the app from the Play Store and your vulnerable backend is still out there, it doesn't matter that no one is accessing the backend legitimately anymore. If the backend is still giving out all the credentials for free and all the location data, you didn't really solve the problem by pulling the app. So to sum this up, in case you want to create an own benign tracker app, I mean, everybody wants to, right? Don't use plaintext communications, use something such as HTTPS. And if you want to secure your app, also make sure that you secure your backend, because else the whole effort is kind of wasted. Don't store any kind of sensitive data inside the app, and also if you want to use special features such as licensing checks, payments, or even trivial things like authentication or authorization, use the APIs that the operating system or some libraries have to offer. Don't try to bake it on your own, because that usually fails and gives you laughs at conferences like Varsbalten. A table with all our findings. The most important column is the right one. So for almost all apps, we had access to all the data that there was in the backend. And this is kind of the bad story about it, because there was almost no app that was done at least properly enough to not give us all the data. There is also the URL at the bottom. It will also be at our summary slide in the very end, where you can find the reports, the write-ups for the project, and all the vulnerabilities we discovered, including those that we could not fit into this talk due to time constraints. Yeah, as I already said, again, the URL with all the vulnerability write-ups, and our contacts, in case you want to get in touch with us after the conference, will also be around at the conference, and I think we have time for